All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another of our monthly lectures put on by ARARA, the American Rock Art Research Association. We're a all-volunteer organization, nonprofit, to encourage research, education, and preservation of rock art. And today's speaker is Dr. Jim Kaiser, former regional Forest Service archaeologist, longtime rock art researcher. Jim, you've been researching rock art for almost 50 years now. It's pretty amazing. Hundreds of publications in your name. And one of your first major projects was recording the rock art of writing on stone. And we're kind of returning to that again this evening, looking at one of the panels at DGOV2. So I will just turn it over to you, Jim, and let you tell us all about it.
Okay, thank you, David. And I think I need to share my screen now, right?
Yes, please.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could show up. And there's the screen share. And there's that. And here we go. Okay. So I'm going to take this little hide the thumbnails. Good. Okay, now I don't see anybody. All I can see is my screen. So what we're going to talk about tonight is panel 19 at DGOV2, a crow calling card at Writing on Stone, and some other cool stuff. And the cool stuff's going to come first. Now I better, so I'm not having any luck starting my, there we go. Okay, so first, the shameless plug on the part of Dave Kaiser and myself. We just have a new book coming out this month called War Stories, Reading Plains Indian Biographic Rock Art. It's from Berghan Books, 500 pages. It is a big, thick book for sure. We bring a bucket of money if you want to buy a copy. It's not exactly a light tome, but you're going to see some stuff today that's actually going to be in the book. So back to the talk. Let's talk about where Writing on Stone is for those few of you who might not know where it is. It's here on the Milk River, just north of the Montana border in Alberta. You see the inset up there, and I'm just a little sidebar here. Where most of us are familiar with the way that we number sites in the United States. Montana is state number 24, Glacier County 24 GL 67 is a specific site, the 67th site recorded in Glacier County in Montana. Canada does not use that same system, of course, the Smithsonian trinomial system. Canada uses what's called the Borden system, which is based on squared areas of latitude and longitude. The smallest area is down to about 16 square kilometers, and they're designated by letter designations. So you get capital D, small g, capital O, small v. That tells you you're in a single square area across Canada. And the two areas that we'll be interested in are DGOV and DGOW, and OW is to the west of OV. So when I say DGOV2, that tells you that's the second site recorded in that square block, latitude and longitude block, listed as DGOV, second site number 2. So that's what that's all about. Please note you've got the Blackfoot area, Blackfeet in Montana, but the Confederacy is the Blackfoot up there in Montana and southern Alberta, and you've got the Crow area down in south central Montana. That's going to become important here in a little bit. So here you are at Writing on Stone. There's a very long history of rock art research at Writing on Stone, especially site DGOV2, which you're looking at here in the encircled area. Excuse me. You're looking straight upstream to the west, so you get a kind of a different view of DGOV2 Most of the time you look at DGOV2 from south looking north. But the first person to really do organized recording at DGOV2 was Selwyn Dewdney in 1962. He was brought there by the Glenbow Institute, and he recorded at OV2, he recorded at Verdigris Coulee, he recorded at a number of other sites. What he did, Dewdney did, he called his work tracings, but in fact they were rice paper that he wet and applied to the sandstone, and then he drew through the wet rice paper with Conte chalk. But as you can see here, when his rice paper dried, he then put it onto the artist's board he had, and he added details when he was looking at the images. So what he did was more of a sketch than a true tracing. I came to writing on stone in 1976, hired by Alberta Parks. This is not me in 1976. This is much, much later. But I worked at DGOV2 and 57 other sites in the park and upstream to Verdigris Coulee. So recorded 58 sites in the park, traced on clear polyethylene sheets. About 15 years later, Michael Klassen was hired by the park to go and look at all my recordings, to annotate all the recordings that I had done. He also found new sites in the intervening 15 years. A number of new sites had been found. He recorded those on polyethylene sheets, as you see him doing here. He found some other new sites that he recorded but didn't trace, like this. And he, like I say, he annotated all of my tracings. So the bottom line is that long history of work produced an equally long history of recordings and publications. In the upper left there, you see Dewdney's 1964 article in the Beaver. It's the only article that Dewdney authored about writing on stone, about Alberta rock art. Well, he authored another one, but it doesn't have anything to do with writing on stone. But that article published in the Beaver, which is a somewhat obscure Canadian journal, very difficult to get a hold of. He published that, and it's 10, 12 pages long. Mostly it's what I did in the summer when I recorded the rock art at Writing on Stone. So it's more or less a travelogue rather than a rock art recording. Dewdney was an artist, not an archaeologist. There are the sketch recordings that he did as an example. He produced a whole folio of these. I used to have a full set when I worked at Writing on Stone, but 15 moves variously across the United States back and forth. I lost many of them. I still have some electronically. The Glenbow used to have those up on a website that you could see, but then the Glenbow moved. So I don't think they're still available. I got some from Jack Brink. I've got a partial bunch. They're very helpful. They're a really good historic record of what was where when Dewdney recorded it. I came along then, and in '77 published this in the Canadian Journal of Archaeology. Excuse me, I also gave a report to Alberta Parks, which is more a fieldwork report. This is a professional journal article. These were the sorts of recordings that I did. These are reduced copies of my recordings that are now on file at the museum in Edmonton and with Alberta Parks. So there's a full set of these. I have a full set of these. I think other people also have, and they're on file at the museum. Michael Klassen did state-of-the-art research throughout the 1990s. Here's an example where he actually rappelled down to parts of site DGOW32. OW32 was originally partially recorded by Dewdney. I could partially record another part of the site by using a ladder set up in the Milk River. The river had taken out the area that you used to be able to walk to the site just before Dewdney got there. Dewdney set up a scaffold. I used the ladder to get to another part of it. Now you can't get to any part of it. You can't even set up a scaffold. It's right in the middle of the Milk River now. We did a drone survey and a drone recording of that site in 2019. But Michael rappelled down into two parts of the site and took some beautiful pictures of it. So in addition to that, Michael did a 1995 MA thesis, and he summarized that in a 1998 article in this volume, The Archaeology of Rock Art, edited by Chris Chippendale and Paul Tayson. So Michael was very busy in the 1990s. He also wrote several rock art articles about Alberta, various sites, including Writing on Stone. He co-authored the book with me, the first summary of Plains Indian rock art in a region-wide sense, the Northern Plains at least, and a couple of articles in Plains Anthropologist. So as you came into the 2000s, the 21st century, the rock art research continued. Other rock art scholars who have written about Writing on Stone include our dearly departed friend Jack Brink, David Kaiser, who hosted this tonight, another dearly departed friend, George Poetschap, Larry Lohendorf, Stephen Lysette, Marty Magny, Mark Willis, and Allison McAllister. So there's lots of folks that have written about Writing on Stone. Joan Woodman also. So there's lots of folks that have written about Writing on Stone, and the journals where this research has been published include the Canadian Journal of Archaeology. Here's an example. This is about site DGOW 20. American Antiquity, Journal of Field Archaeology, Plains Anthropologist, more than half a dozen articles in Plains Anthropologist that have as their major focus the rock art at Writing on Stone, American Indian Art Magazine, Whispering Wind, which is an Indian hobbyist magazine, and American Indian Rock Art, which has half a dozen articles specific to the rock art of Writing on Stone. So as you can see, if you look at it, you can imagine that between 1960 and 2010, in that 50-year span, you could think that maybe we've exhausted what Writing on Stone has to offer with all that work, all those publications, and all those people. Well, if you de-stretched that idea, you would turn out to be horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. In 2012, we began to use DStretch at Writing on Stone. That year, a crew that I brought to the site, the park with Jack Brink, we were the first bunch we had a brand new DStretch camera that John Harmon had helped us install DStretch right into the camera. That year, we began to use it at the site, not at DGOV2, but in fact at DGOV83, which is about a kilometer downstream from DGOV2. It's a site I recorded in 1976. And what we did at that site was we changed the identification of a group of shield-bearing warriors from an iconic presentation to a biographic narrative tally. And here's how we did that. There's the site as you would see it today if you were down below looking at it. It's up about 10 feet above the ground surface. There's the 1976 recording done off of a ladder. And you see the little curlicue above the right side of the guy on the right end. And you see some kind of other lines that don't make too much sense. Basically, what that was, how I interpreted that originally was that was an iconic presentation of two, maybe a third there on the left end, shield-bearing warriors, very typical of shield-bearing warriors that stand there showing their shield design and maybe their weapon, saying, "This is me, this is what I can do, this is my ceremonial approach to life." Well, a DStretch image that we took with our camera, and we looked through it and went, "Oh my God, look at this. This is what this is." You can see the curlicue in the upper right corner is in fact a floating coup-strike bow. If you make a photo tracing from that, you can see a second coup-strike bow floating above the right shoulder of the middle warrior. You can see a shield design on the middle warrior. And you can see that both of those warriors are pin-cushioned with arrows shot in them. I think there's 3 arrows shot in the right warrior and 2 in the center warrior. And that streak right in the middle between the two wires at the bottom is a club being used to whack the middle wire somewhere on the legs or around the waist. So what happened there is, as we looked at the DStretch and we made the photo tracing and we began to realize what this was, suddenly this was no longer an iconic presentation of warriors. This was a tally of war honors done as a biographic narrative. This was one man's record of warriors that he had shot and killed and counted coup on, and a stolen shield, a shield that he had captured as a war trophy. So in 2017, I published in the Canadian Journal of Archaeology an article called From Iconic to Narrative, a DStretch Discovery at Writing on Stone. It took a few years from 2012 to 2017, but I was busy in the interim with things like Bear Gulch and Shield-Bearing Warrior Compendium and whatnot. But the point here is, this is a very interesting find, okay? Very interesting. But in fact, we knew these shield figures were there. We found new aspects of them, but we didn't find, DStretch didn't lead us to find anything brand new. It changed the interpretation of shield-bearing warriors that we already knew were there. So, interesting stuff, other cool stuff, but nothing brand new. Well, the same thing is happened with Sarah Woodman. She did her, in 2015, she did a thesis from the University of Leicester, and published in 2016. It was a DStretch examination of DGOV2, and she found paint smears at several panels. She found additional incised motifs at several panels, and she identified new shield-bearing warriors at 2 panels at DGOV2. She was there, she was working with some assistance from fellows named Michael Turney and Landon Bendiak, who we'll meet in just a minute. But here's the first one she found, panel 11. You can see, nice little shield-bearing warrior, red pigment. It's actually incised shield, but it's painted red. And this is an important new discovery. It adds to the corpus of shield-bearing warriors in the park. So no doubt about it. This is a good find. She also found something new at panel 25. This is my original recording of panel 25, done in 1976. And you can see I've got a shield-bearing warrior there on the right with a cool shield design, and then 3 sort of blobs there to the left. And if you look carefully, you can see washed away between the 2 blobs at the bottom. And what I thought was that was probably a shield and a shield bearer there, but you just couldn't tell. Well, the reason you can't tell is because that panel is about 10 feet above where you are, and it's difficult to get to. We had to record it on a ladder, and you can't see it all that well, as you can see by the picture. Well, when you DStretch it, things happen. And there's a close-up of the DStretch. And yes, in fact, what you've got there is a shield-bearing warrior. There's the shield perimeter right there. And the head here has got ear bobs or earrings and maybe some face paint on it. These are the legs, what I thought was a washed away shield, but it's not, it's 2 legs. And here is a really nice shield design with vertical lines, and possibly, what it looks like to me is that maybe a spread-eagled bird for a shield design. The problem here is when a parallax, and you've taken that picture from a long distance away, you're 9-10 feet below the panel, and you're looking up at it. If you got up there with a pole-assisted photograph, you'd be able to see that design better, and I think you'd be able to pick out what it really is. But again, what we've got here is 2 new shield figures added to the total of shield figures at DGOV2. So, yep, nice new stuff, really important. But again, stuff that we kind of expected to find at Writing on Stone. Well, at the same time that Woodman was working there, starting in 2010, a group of people from Golder Associates, Michael Turney and Landon Bendiak, had been working on monitoring the rock art at various sites in the park as part of the UNESCO World Heritage nomination. And Jack would go down there and visit those folks. One of the, while they were working, one of the main sites that they were dealing with was this DGOV2, the one we've been talking about the whole time. And there it is. It's the site that's in that big yellow polygon there. So you see it's quite large, 26 different panels of rock art. And each of those panels is in fact a locus with several faces of carved and painted rock art. I just didn't have the term locus in my vocabulary when I designated each of those. But they worked there from between 2010 and 2016 or so. And they photographed in particular panel 19, which we're going to see in a few minutes, and panels 21 and 22. And we'll see all of that stuff. Now, Jack also came down there while they were working in those years, and Brink photographed those panels. And he also photographed site DGOV77. Now, DGOV77 is a little further downriver than DGOV83. So we're going to take a minute and look at those sites here. There's DGOV83. So you see that's about a kilometer downstream from DGOV2, which is here. And there's DGOV87, which is another kilometer further downstream from DGOV83. So there's the three sites that we're going to be dealing with here. Now, I spoke with Michael Turney about the history of their use of DStretch in their monitoring project. And Turney wrote to me, he said, I'm kind of quoting here, Landon Bendiak, who was the project photographer, we'd started experimenting with DStretch about 2012, but we didn't start incorporating it into our annual monitoring report, didn't start using it systematically until 2013. At that point, we realized there was a lot of stuff at Writing on Stone that hadn't been previously identified. However, we did not suspect what we had at panel 19 until a year or so later, about 2016. So what you've got is a situation where you've got Golder Associates folks working at DGOV2. You've got Sarah Woodman working at DGOV2, sort of hand in glove, doing her thesis stuff. And you've got Jack coming down there visiting off and on, looking over their shoulder, photographing some of the stuff they're doing and photographing other sites. Well, Jack plays a significant part in this story, but first we're going to look at what part he played at DGOV77. Well, DGOV77 is a simple little site, again, downriver from DGOV2, about halfway between DGOV2 and the campground. When I recorded it in 1976, there was a little bit of the floodplain left below the site. You could put a ladder up there and get up to it. You had to crawl up a ladder fairly reasonable distance. I think it's 6, 8, 10 feet above your head. It no longer is. Now the river has cut everything away from below it. The site has this odd human figure. This human figure's never been reported before. There's a reason for that. When I recorded it in 1976, it didn't fit any style I was familiar with. I didn't know of any other figure like that on the plains. There are a few, as I've come to learn, but not very many. And it just kind of stuck out like a one-off. And so I listed it, human figure, and moved on. It didn't fit a simple organizational schema that I was using. The one figure that is published from the site is this buffalo. It's the only one, and it's a small little thing. It's published. It's carved in the central panel at the site. If you'll note, there's right in the center of your screen, there's a bear paw, and there's 5 of those at this site. So it's a cool site. It deserves to have its own report, actually. It deserves to have somebody go back and do more recording. Maybe Michael Klassen has done some and annotated it and done some more stuff. But if you look right there in the center of it, in my original 1976 recording, there's some pigment lines, and that's all I could call them. There's the whatever that is in the center there. There's the pigment that I recorded. Now you look at that one way, and maybe it's a human, but what's a human doing with a tail? You know, the tail over here. What's that? Could this be front leg here? Maybe front legs. Maybe these are hooves. Maybe that's an animal kind of up, you know, kind of on the upslope. I didn't know what it was in 1976. The pigment's very faded. There just was no way to tell what it was. And basically, I recorded it as pigment lines and moved on. It was just not possible to identify what that was. Well, then Jack got DStretch involved. Here's the site. Here's the image. And if you really squint and give it the old side eye here, you can see some pigment lines in there. And there's pigment. What you've got here, let's remember, this is my tracing, and that's a completely flat, no parallax tracing. That's a two-dimensional thing, okay? So there's no parallax there. In the picture that you're going to see, you're going to be getting a little parallax because Jack is down below the thing. He's not right up next to it, and he's looking from an angle. He's looking downstream at it. But here's a DStretch. Whoa, yes, sirree. And here's another. Whoa, yeah, you've got a human figure there. There's no doubt about it. Here's a photo tracing of that. And you see a human figure clearly with two legs, two arms, a head. This thing up here, right up in here, and there's a little bit more of it over here. Maybe that's something in his hand. You know, maybe there's a rattle with a stem here that you just can't see yet. Can't tell because you've got one picture from Jack, right? But if you look carefully here, you'll see that both arms are outlined with incisions. So, and he's got this beautiful dance bustle, really trailing all the way down here. So it's not a little short, stubby tail like I got. It's this great dance bustle. Well, my land. This is important. This is a major addition to the data corpus at Writing on Stone. This dancer is a typical Northern Plains dance posture with the dancer wearing a dance bustle. This is the only example of this at Writing on Stone. The absolute only example at Writing on Stone. Nearest ones we have on the plains are in central Montana. We got some at Bear Gulch. And then you go down further south, and there's dancers like this at Joliet and some other dancers further south. We got some dancers at No Bear, but they're very different than these guys. So than this guy. So, gee whiz, nobody knew this was here. All we had was lines, you know, like what I recorded. Now we have this beautiful dancing human. And we know that the Blackfeet had loads of dances that they did. So this is one of them. So here's something that's brand new. Major addition, brand new. It had been previously hinted, yes, there's pigment here, but this one, the image is actually revealed by DStretch. Now let's move to this. What Jack and Landon Bendiak and Michael Turney have done, though, with their research, has added incredible new chapters in the rock art at Writing on Stone. And these stories are just beginning to be told. Here's the first one. I take this from an article that Turney, Bendiak, and Brink authored in Plains Anthropologist a couple of years ago. And you can read it. It's well worth struggling through. It's a very technical article, as it had to be, but it's well worth it for the information. The first thing in that article, and believe it or not, what I'm going to show you in this slide is a throwaway in the article. Literally, it's a one-page, oh yeah, we found this, oh hum, and they moved on. This may be the most important thing they found. They provided a relative date for an enigmatic style of zoomorphs at writing on stone that nobody knew anything about. There's the two underlying zoomorphs and that odd little stick figure guy. There's a superimposed zoomorph on the top, and you look, the upper two are bison. That superimposed one is some sort of a canid. Here's another bison on another face at that same panel. There's a second panel at this site that has a fourth animal on it. There's only one other site known on the plains, and that's right across the river at Writing on Stone, that has these kinds of animals, okay? Until they DStretched it. Look what floats in from there. That's a loon. That's a naturalistic loon. The only one in plains rock art. And why we relate it to those is those animals are naturalistic. Those are the only naturalistic animals at Writing on Stone. And here you've got a painted naturalistic loon right up to and including the band across its throat. That's the only loon in plains rock art, and I wager to say it's the only naturalistic loon in North American rock art. That's an incredible find, okay? Well, why is this even more incredible? Because those images are dated by superimposition under both vertical series and foothills abstract tradition art. And vertical series and foothills abstract tradition art in that area are late archaic styles, late archaic traditions. So this art has to be middle archaic. It could even be older. It could be Paleo-Indian level art. So they've just barely scratched the surface on this. And like I said, it's a throwaway. Jack wrote the article with Turney and Bendiak, and the three authors just say, well, yeah, that's under the vertical series and the foothills stuff, and we don't know much about it. There's another site across the river that has one animal, and that's it. Boom, move on. This is an incredibly important find. Okay, there's the article where they focused on the foothills abstract and the vertical series art. So again, I go back to that. First thing is they may have discovered Paleo-Indian rock art at Writing on Stone. If it's not Paleo-Indian, it's at the very latest, it's middle archaic, if not early archaic. So somebody needs to go back to that site with pole-assisted photography, because the photographs that Turney and Bendiak and Jack worked with, there's some that were done on a pole, but a lot of that photography is from down below. And they need to get right up and close to it, really close, and take hundreds and hundreds of photographs like Mark Willis does, and really do a detailed study of those animals. They need to go across the river to the other site that has a single animal like that and do a DStretch study of that site. So, okay, but foothills abstract and vertical series. There's the two pictures that really piqued my interest when Jack sent them to me. Hey, we've got a contractor at Writing on Stone, and they found vertical series stuff at DGOV2. Can you believe that? I said, no, I can't. Show me a picture. And these are the two pictures he sent me. There's the photo tracings from those. And you can see, sure as the day, vertical columns of X's and O's and sideways V's and plus signs. And you start looking, there's like a treasure hunt in there. You see all kinds of stuff. In addition to the vertical series stuff, which is scattered throughout there, you see handprints and painted walls, wall paintings, and those are typical foothills abstract stuff. So you've got superimposed vertical series under foothills abstract, which interestingly is the same chronological sequence that we've got at hidden handprint. Okay, so why is this important? Well, it's important for a couple of reasons. Before this site, DGOV2, the vertical series and foothills abstract stuff at OV2 was found, and hidden handprint. And mind you, they were both found about the same time. Turney and Bendiak and Brink are finding this stuff about 2012, 2013, 2014. Well, about 2014, 2015, David Kaiser and I and Mavis Greer found hidden handprint on the Cutbank Creek in Montana, 80 kilometers, 60 miles away from Writing on Stone to the south. So suddenly, before that, in 2010, if you'd have mapped the vertical series and the Foothills Abstract Tradition rock art, you'd have found a single site, a Foothills Abstract Tradition painted cave called Mask Cave in the Sweetgrass Hills as the only site with either of those two traditions between Atherton Canyon and Okotoks Rock. Giant hole in the donut stretching from Lewistown, Montana to Calgary, Alberta, or near Calgary, Alberta. Okay, giant hole in the donut. Suddenly, 2014, 2015, we're plunking down sites, fitting them in there, Writing on Stone, DGOV2, hidden handprint, then Jack Pine stuff at Glenwood Erratic. Suddenly we start filling in the gaps, and we filled them in with these incredible sites, hidden handprint, and this DGOV2. You think to yourself, well, okay, they found a couple of sites, ho-hum, so what? But even more importantly, look at this. Here's a sequence of characters. Now, you look at a lot of those and you see X's and O's and simple stuff. Anybody can make an X, anybody can make an O. Doesn't, yes, they're in vertical alignments, and yes, that's important to this rock art tradition. But here you see a series of characters that are very complex. If you look, you see a dot here, a dot, single dot, there's some other junk, but a single dot, a cross, and that cross is in a V shape. Dot, cross, in a V shape. Dot, cross, in a V shape. Okay? That's what's called a compound character. It's complex, it's not simple, and there's a sequence of them there. Jack found one here at DGOV2. Well, guess what? A year before, we'd found the exact same sequence of compound characters at hidden handprint 80 kilometers away. Dot, cross, in a V shape. And you can see that there used to be more of them on the top that are eroded away at hidden handprint. So here we've got the same complex compound characters aligned in a sequence at these two sites. Now, that could be the same artist, but if it's not the same artist, I guarantee those two artists knew what they were communicating and would have known what each one was saying with that art. And we're beginning, hopefully, to understand that there's communication potential in this vertical series style or tradition art. So, brand new stuff, absolutely, earth-shattering new stuff at Writing on Stone. That's the other cool stuff, but it wouldn't be a presentation by Kaiser if there weren't some horse rock art in it, okay? So here's panel 19. This is the one that they photographed, and I had worked at this panel in 1976, and I recorded a horse. That horse, there's my tracing of it. You see, it's a traditional, typical Blackfoot horse, and it's got a medicine bundle as a halter decoration, as a bridle bit decoration, that comb thing hanging out off the end of its nose. There's where that horse is. If you look really carefully, you can actually see the outline of the horse right in there, okay? So there's the halter decoration, the medicine bundle, called, believe it or not, a thing to tie on the halter in Blackfoot. So that's what I recorded. I also recorded another couple of horses right up in here, right next to the word horse, coincidentally. And that's all I had on that panel. They're fairly deeply incised, and that's all I could see in 1976. We had a lot of stuff to do. We were hitting it hard and fast. Well, Michael Turney came along. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael Klassen came along, and he annotated my tracing, and he found what he thought was two shield figures painted right there at the end of that white arrow, right above the label on the panel there. So here's my tracing, a part of it, annotated by Klassen. There's the two shield figures that he sketched in there. You can kind of see round figures with heads and whatnot. He says, extremely faint ochre, probably shield figures should be traced, but almost impossible to capture. Horses and other elements are superimposed on those shield figures, and that there's an extensive scratching and other images above and to the right of those shield figures. Well, here's what Mike Turney got out of that from taking close-up photographs of the panel under various lighting conditions, and you betcha, he got all kinds of horses there. You see half a dozen horses. Here's my two horses. There's a horse and there's a horse, damaged head. He put a couple of V-neck humans in there, loads and loads of teepees, a horse here that's actually tethered to a teepee, horse stealing scene. Here's a horse, here's a horse, here's a horse, here's a horse. Yes, they're superimposed. But here's the shield figures that Michael Klassen had seen that Turney sketched into the site. Cool graffito here, Sergeant B. Watson, 4/6/1916, one of the last Mounties across the river at the police outpost. So we got a panel with a lot more scratched horses than I was able to see. They're very lightly scratched in there, but they're clearly there. And these two painted shield figures that are underneath the scratchings. So there is, Jack sent me a picture in 2016. That was, they begin to DStretch this stuff. And there was a picture Jack took. And he said, look at that, Kaiser, there's a shield figure. And then he said, there's a second one. So you've got a shield figure there with a head and a beautiful headdress above it. You got a second shield figure there with a head there and maybe two feathers. And Jack says, when I DStretch this, Kaiser, it shows one clear shield figure with a great headdress and a cool shield design, and what looks like a second figure to the right. So I showed you kind of what it is. And that's where it stood. We had two faded shield bearing wires, first seen by Michael Klassen and now exposed by DStretch. And this really shows the power of suggestion. Michael Klassen saw two shield figures, very faint, says almost impossible to trace. Yep, that's true. And Sarah Woodman, she'd been primed to see two shield figures. She talked to Michael Turney. She saw Klassen's annotated form, and she knew that there were two shield figures there. So even when she had a photograph, DStretch, of a horse, see the horse's face, nose, neck, front quarters, and the shield guy here. There's the horse's ears. Even when she had, there's no shield bearing warrior here. There's a horse. Guess what? She said, and here's the two shield figures. That's the power of suggestion. Don't go into a site like this knowing what you're going to find. But thank heavens, Turney and Brink eventually took more DStretch images and found the shield figures. Remember, this was Jack's first picture when he thought he saw two shield figures. There's the two shield figures he thought he saw. And a couple of years later, they'd finally seen the horseman. Jack wrote me, he said, Jim, for the picture that I originally saw that looked like two shield bearing warriors, my framing wasn't good. And remember, Jack wasn't working with a DStretch camera. He knew kind of where the pigment was, so he snapped several pictures. My framing wasn't great, and I was floored when Turney sent me better images that clearly showed this is not two shield-bearing warriors, but one on the left, and he's sitting on a horse, the neck of which, here you go, the neck of which is the curved feature on the right side. And there's no doubt that it's a horse. Here's the horse, there's its tied up tail, there's its back leg, there's its front quarters. It's badly damaged by water staining here. He says, you can clearly see the horse's ears there, and he's wearing a bridle bit decoration there. Very cool. And I missed this, says Jack, until the photos with a broader perspective showed up. And there's a photo tracing of that horseman with that beautiful lightning chain bit at Writing on Stone, panel 19. Okay, so our two shield-bearing warriors are really a horseman, but there's lots more to this story, okay? First, that horse is a crow-style animal. Using my 2017 formula for differentiating crow and Blackfeet horses, and you use the arc of the neck and the angle of the head, though that formula places this animal directly in the crow distribution. The upper one is Blackfoot distribution. There's our horse at panel 19, way out on the edge of the normal distribution. But if you put it in the crow distribution, it's smack dab in the middle of the normal distribution. So arc of the neck says crow. Then you look at the way the head is oriented. On the left, you see Blackfoot horses' heads. They all face toward the front. They all face on the level. 90% of them are between 30 degrees above level and 30 degrees below level. And our panel 19 horse looks almost straight down. But if you look at crow horses, they all look almost straight down. And our panel 19 horse looks straight down. So stylistically, that's a crow horse. And the decorated bridle is also crow. There's that bridle decoration. Decorated bridle bits on Blackfoot horses are very, very, very stylized. They're the thing to tie on the halter. There's the one on that very same panel. There's one on a bison robe from the 1870s. There's one across the river at Writing on Stone. And there's one at Turner Ranch. I think we've got now, between robes and rock art, we probably got 20 of those. They're all exactly like that, okay? Crow bridle bits are lightning chain bits. Crow horses typically wear what are called lightning chain bits. These are Spanish chain bits, and here's how they draw them. At the no water site, the two upper ones at 24 GV 191 on the left, lower left, and at the Rygate South site on the lower right. I think we've got those bridle bits at 8 or 10 sites in Crow Country, just like that. No Blackfoot horse, no horse identified as a Blackfoot horse wears a lightning chain bit. Okay, stylistically then, that's a crow horse wearing a crow bridle bit decoration. But Ryder also identified himself as a crow. His long hair is a typical crow hairstyle. More than a dozen crow warriors in rock art wear this long hair at least 10 sites. There's 24 GV 191 on top, 48 HO8 in the middle, Eagle Creek Canyon, the third one down, No Water, the fourth one down. That's very typical. We've got, like I say, 10 sites with horsemen with that. Among the more than 200 historic period Blackfeet warriors at Writing on Stone, not a single one wears long hair like this. Not a single one. That's not the way Blackfeet drew themselves in rock art, wearing their hair. And the shield design is also more crow than Blackfoot. How do we know that? Well, Blackfeet drew equestrian period shields, and so did the crow. Now, I'm not talking about shield-bearing warriors, pedestrian shield-bearing warriors now. In pedestrian shield-bearing warriors, both crow and Blackfeet drew all kinds of really cool heraldic designs on their shields. But when you get to the equestrian period, when they're mounted on horses, and this one clearly is, and that shield, if you use the shield size determination, that's just right at the 32-inch shield size, right at the, it's a pretty early equestrian period shield, but it's right where it should be in terms of equestrian period. Blackfeet rock art has only 2 examples of simple heraldic designs. Those bottom 2 on the bottom right, those are in the battle scene at VGOW 32. And they're very simple, 4 cardinal directions and a concentric circle. The rest of Blackfeet equestrian shields tend to be fringed. Not tend to be, they are fringed. If there's any decoration at all, they're fringed like this. There's 2 dots on that one in the upper left. I'm not sure that that's really a shield design. So fringed with feathers and streamers are typical Blackfoot shield decor. Crows, on the other hand, regularly illustrated equestrian period shields with heraldic motifs, and there's examples. That cross pate design, which the one at panel 19 is a variant of, occurs. You see 3 examples of it there among crow equestrian period shields. So while it's not a slam dunk, that's more crow shield design equestrian period than it is Blackfoot. And finally, that guy's headdress is drawn with a convention we call the crow feathers. A Y-shaped upper termination topped with eagle down fluffs. There you see I've outlined the the way they drew that. This is a common convention only used by the crow and the Mandana Datsa to illustrate feathers for war bonnets and weapon tabs. And there's weapon tabs in rock art, in the lower 2 on the left, and in robe art you see weapon tabs on the right, and shield perimeter, feathers along a shield perimeter, and feathers on a shield trailer coming across in the upper middle. Well, that's the way the crows, the Mandana Datsa, drew their feathers, call them crow feathers. And these are found at 8 crow rock art sites, crow feathers like this. They're not found with any Blackfoot rock art image. Finally, so if we count them on our fingers, this is a crow-style horse with a crow-style bridle bit decoration, with a crow headdress. The guy's wearing a crow headdress and a crow hairstyle with a crow-style shield decoration. Well, we finally get to the fact that he's also facing off against what we call a stacked array of weapons. And if you look at it, it's right there. These horizontal lines, and those are generic weapons. That shows the enemy force that this guy's going up against. This is a fairly common crow convention, and there's a tracing of that. That upper one might be a gun. I tend to think it's probably a gun. The others are generic. That's a typical crow convention. It's found at 8 or 10 sites in crow country, but it's not found. It's only found at one time in Blackfoot rock art, at Writing on Stone or anywhere else in Blackfoot rock art. That's at DGOW 32. So while it's not a slam dunk on this one, it's way more typical crow than Blackfoot. So everything about this piece says crow rock art. Nothing about it shouts at you Blackfoot rock art. Everything about it says crow rock art. So why is it here? We call this a calling card. That's what we term this. But why would a crow warrior paint this sort of a composition here at Writing on Stone, right in the heart of the Blackfoot homeland? I mean, smack dab in the center of Blackfoot territory. Why would he do that? Well, these calling cards, historic period warfare was filled full of gamesmanship and taunting your enemies and anything you can do, I can do better kind of stuff. There's a really cool story told by the Bloods about one of their famous warriors who went down to Sioux country, and he snuck into a Sioux village to steal horses. And he found a guy who had 3 real good racehorse type horses tethered to his pegs right in front of his tent. Well, this guy snuck into the Sioux chief's tent and saw that there was still a kettle of stew on the fire. All the Indians were sleeping. So he helped himself to a helping of buffalo stew, and he left a pair of his moccasins. He had an extra pair of moccasins. He left a pair of his moccasins right there by the fire to tell the Sioux warrior, the Sioux chief, who it was that had come and eaten his food and stolen his horses outside. And then he stole the horses and got away with them. That's the kind of calling cards they left. Well, we know they left them as rock art too. You did this, you taunted your enemies, you bragged about your own victories, especially your victories over those particular enemies. And this was a major feature of warfare. Trappers, traders, missionaries, they're Indian agents. They all noticed this. Military men, especially, because they're busy fighting the Indians in the U.S. They found places where there was all these painted trees, painted cottonwood trees. The bark falls off an old cottonwood when it dies and forms this white skeleton of a tree. And the Indians would take charcoal and make their own drawings on this. And if those were by village, they called them painted woods. And if they're by a village, the raiders that were coming to raid that village would draw their pictures on it. Then when the villagers noticed they'd been had and stolen horses, they'd go out to the painted woods and draw their own pictures. I mean, they said, warriors selected large trees near enemy villages or in places where enemies had previously painted their own exploits to paint their own war deeds as a taunt to their enemies. So we got reports after reports after reports of this in the ethnohistoric literature. We know that Crow and Blackfeet warriors were particularly adept at doing this. And we've recorded and identified a dozen sites where this activity has taken place in Russia. So here's that that map that I showed you. We're getting right down to the end here. Here's that map that I showed you: Blackfoot territory in the north and Crow territory in the south. There's panel 19 at DGOV2. There's Cheval Bonnet on Cut Bank Creek. There's Eagle Creek Canyon. There's 3 Crow sites identified right in the heart of Blackfoot country. Well, Blackfeet aren't left out here. There's 24 GV 191, Blackfoot images right in the middle of Crow country. There's Explorer's Petroglyph. That's a raid on Lewis and Clark's returning party by Blackfeet. There's Turner Rock Shelter, exactly. There's Porcupine Lookout. Tim McCleary's identified a Blackfoot scalp in Pictograph Cave. And there's Teepee Rock Shelter in the northern Bighorn Basin. So you got Blackfeet coming to Crow country doing this, Crows going to Blackfeet country doing this, but you've got other groups, okay, doing the same thing. Here, this site represents 2 different sites at Writing on Stone. We've got one that's a horse that's clearly not Blackfoot. We don't know who it is. It might be Crow, but there's just not enough evidence to show it. There's another whole site that's a horse raid that we're pretty sure is a Kootenai horse raid. Kootenai horse raiders from across the mountains over there at Flathead Lake area coming across raiding the Blackfeet or the Crees and taking their horses and taking them back over the mountains. Here's another one down here. Larry Lohendorf is identified in the Assiniboine drawing. And the enemy the Assiniboines fighting is a Crow. Lo and behold, right here in the middle of Crow country. And here's the Bierce Arbor Glyph, which is a Sioux or a Yanktonai or an Assiniboine or a Gros drawing right down in the middle of Crow country. So you got lots and lots and lots of these things going on. Panel 19 is just one of them. So our 2 shield-bearing warriors turned into a horseman drawn as a Crow calling card. I suspect that there's plenty more surprises like this awaiting DStretch research at other Writing on Stone sites, and I can't wait to have people go and use more DStretch at those sites. I want to thank Michael Turney, Jack Brink, Landon Bendiak, David Minnick, who did a lot of the DStretches here for me, David Kaiser, and Michael Klassen. All those people shared notes, site forms, images, information, and I really appreciate it. And I want to dedicate this to Jack Brink, who to me will always be the heart of Writing on Stone. I miss that guy always. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Great presentation. If you want to stop sharing your screen, we can open this up to any questions. If anyone has any questions they want to put in the chat, I'd be happy to relay them. The only thing we have in the chat so far right now, Jim, is someone just mentions the calling card actions in each other's territories as it reminds them of the Russians and the Ukraine. Similar thing, just the back and forth in each other's territory.
Oh, yeah. And what's really interesting, it really is. It's like gang tagging. When we wrote about the first time about this calling card rock art, one of the reviewers said, you ought to check out, and I forget the source, but this woman's work on gang tagging in Los Angeles communities, and it really is. There's all kinds of tagging that goes on. And the same thing happens in warfare, all sorts of it. There was a picture, a famous picture in Afghanistan when we went to try and root out bin Laden. And one of the American soldiers was keeping a record of the Taliban troops that they had killed. And it's exactly the same sorts of things. So it kind of goes with warfare. But yeah, it's back and forth in the enemy's territory and back out, leave your calling card, leave, go back, that sort of thing.
At DGOV2, I'm just curious, was there any superimposition going on with the Crow horse in Blackfoot territory?
Yeah, there's at least 2 and maybe 3 Blackfoot horses carved over the top of the Crow horse, which is also fits that gang tagging thing. It's very common with those figures when if a Crow warrior goes into Blackfoot territory and carves or paints his horse, and a Blackfoot guy finds it, oftentimes what he does is carve or paint his own Blackfoot horse right on top of the Crow horse. This is be the 2nd or 3rd example of that we found. So it's I was here, no, I'm here now. This is my place. So that happens a lot. So yes, there's superimposition. John, you had a question?
Yeah, I remember the day that we were all walking down in the park, and I think his name was Bendiak or something like that. I just don't recall his name now. He had his iPad, and he had DStretch on it, and he was taking pictures up, and all of a sudden, all this crazy scene came up, and they figured it was that they started talking about the vertical series and what the heck was that. And we spent the day taking a look at that at all different angles, and it reminded Jack of Okotoks, where they have some vertical series as well. And he later found a small piece of vertical series on a piece at Glenwood. But I remember that day so well because we kept looking at that site and looking at that vertical series, and was it really vertical series? And so this your talk brought back so many memories of us in all over the park looking at these things, but DGOV2, one of my favorite spots for sure. So good grief. Thank you very much. Excellent talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat right now. Well, everyone seems very quiet. Oh, I just see a thank you very much. Another thank you very much. So I think everyone enjoyed it. You were so thorough, Jim. I think you answered most of their questions. So that being the case, I think we'll end this. Thank you very much, Jim. Really appreciate it. Great talk as always. Always enjoyable. And again, we're getting more people saying fascinating. Thank you. Thank you. So again, appreciate it. And then I hope everyone can join us again next month. Again, 2nd Saturday of the month. We're going to have Chris Lohendorf giving a talk for us. So hopefully we'll see you all then, and we'll be sending out details soon. So thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.
For showing up. Bye-bye.